Welcome back to Core Motivations Podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Connolly. I'm a certified Enneagram coach and a symbiotic marriage coach. Hey, perhaps this is your first time joining us. I'm really happy you found us. Gosh, so much happening right now. Starting with Mother's Day this past Sunday. Happy Mother's Day to all the moms, whatever that may look like for you. We're also getting ready for our first Arizona summer, as well as a quick trip to Florida. And drum roll, please. Core Motivations Podcast is celebrating our 1-year anniversary. Am I missing any updates? If you can think of some, post them on our Instagram page and we'll mention it next week. Okay, well, how about a recap from last week? We finished up with our final 3 types and their connector types. We talked about paths from stress path to conversion path and being able to recognize when you are utilizing for the good or bad of those connector types and how to be aware of each. We also shared some affirmations and how to use them to shift your mind and committing these positives to your mind as you replace that negative self-talk. So I wouldn't say she's my good friend yet, but Mel Robbins sends out these quick little reminders. And I read this last week about how when you are making the shift towards change, you should not just say out loud what you're doing, but write it down as well. Something about saying it out loud and writing it down that makes the change real, wouldn't you say? Not just this passing thought in your mind. Say it as if you're already doing this thing, even if you haven't started. For example, I'm a podcaster instead of I want to be a podcaster. I am a good mom instead of I want to be or I will be. That you're actually walking in that proclamation, doing the thing or the things that you are actually claiming it now. Okay, so back to the good news. This great milestone of 1 year as a podcaster. I wanted to share some things I have learned over this past year that can also help if you are looking to start a podcast, but also it can apply to starting something new. This is what I discovered and experienced. It's important to be prepared, but also you can prepare too much. Don't be afraid to go off script a little bit. I realized that repeating things is okay because you are always encountering and expecting new listeners, as well as it solidifies what you're teaching, learning, and listening to. Saying who you are and what and why you're doing the podcast is equally important. And it makes it memorable. Finding something that stands out and saying it at the start or the end of your podcast. Y'all know mine. Welcome back to Core Motivations. Until next time, and as always, I'm rooting for you. I also learned that being willing to pivot from your original path and plan, it can be good and bad. The pivot, if not careful, can be so far from your original purpose and foundation, leading you to somewhere you never intended to go. Where on the other hand, by not being willing to pivot, it can keep you in a box. In other words, take a chance on something new. If it doesn't work, you'll know pretty quick. And then you can just go back to your roots and try again. Because I believe Failure is only something that happens when you don't try at all. You learn from trying, you learn from those mistakes, and you learn by reflecting on the what went well and what didn't. I also learned that having the right equipment is very important. But as a beginner, basic things are just as good. A mic and your computer works just fine. In other words, don't spend the money. If you don't have it, wait until you grow your audience and start bringing in income. Oh, and don't forget headphones. It makes the recording better. I'm still kind of on the fence and learning how to do that because it sounds different, but the sound that's coming back to you is exactly what other people hear when they listen to it. Guests are always a plus if that is the direction that you're headed in your podcast. Certain podcasts, however, just do fine. You, as the host, and a microphone. Go with what feels right. Also, I learned that you don't have to video your podcast. I was listening to a YouTuber who is an expert, as one can be, about why not to video as a podcaster. He didn't say don't do it. You don't need to in order to make your podcast better. If you do a video as well, the truth is that it takes time to edit your video. Remembering that those who are listening to your podcast, they're already doing that. So making a video is for those that like to listen and watch. People who listen to podcasts, they're already listening while doing other things. I know I do. The truth is it's hard to multitask and watch a video. So if you're trying to add to your reach, then sure, by all means, do a video. If that's not your target, focus on what's working. And always remind yourself what is your purpose in doing a podcast. And that can go for anything. What is your purpose in, and you fill in the blank. If you're no longer sure, it might be time to do a little reflection. It can remind you of the fire you had when you started and an opportunity to refresh your goals. I started doing this podcast so that I could share the things I've learned. And someone would come along and say, wow, what a great perspective. And thanks for bringing clarity to this particular topic. I also did it in hopes I would find more coaching clients. So we'll see how that continues to play out. But ultimately, I started this podcast because I needed a pivot in my life. I realized the importance of doing something that brings me joy and fulfillment, not because someone told me I should or the words I've heard for the past 15 plus years in air quotes, it's your calling. I believe it's important to listen to that still small voice calling you to step out of what is familiar and doing something different. It's okay to do things scared. Maybe talking with people is my gift, and I truly agree. But something very different for me is talking into a mic, not knowing who my audience is, what their background is, or any other specific details about them. Just me, a mic, talking about the things I believe are important. It's very different than my times of pastoring a church. I knew exactly who I was talking to. I had relationships with these people. I was never afraid to stand on stage and talk through a microphone. It's very strange, those differences. I'm sure there are more things that will come to me later on, but for now, these are the things I've discovered over this last year. I know at the beginning of 2026, I talked about some things we would focus on. Before we look at that, I want to look back and recap what we have learned so far. So we started out with learning the basics of what Enneagram is, including that there are 9 Enneagram types. We talked about what core motivations are for each type. Their motivations being core fear, desire, weakness, and longing. We talked about wings, the salt and pepper to your type. It's the extra flavor on your Enneagram type. We created a toolbox with self-care and self-love tools. We learned different techniques, specific self-care strategies for all 9 types. We learned about triads, the head, heart, and gut triad. It's where people respond, how they process emotions, make decisions, and manage stress. Triads help explain how we manage our fear, shame, or anger. We had some real talk conversations, such as being a mom, the good and hard and, well, the ugly of it. We talked about anxiety and depression, being isolated, and, our favorite, self talk, the negative kind, and how to make that shift to the positive self talk. We even introduced some hot topics, which I hope to bring in more of. We had a typing session with a Enneagram 5, and the last few weeks we've been talking about arrows, lines, and paths as it relates to each 9 types and introduced our connector types, which is where a person goes in stress or in health. And I know there is so much more to be discussed. I do like this pattern of heavy Enneagram teaching and then some fun stuff, even difficult topics and current events. So, what does it look like moving forward? Well, we'll continue to stay on this path, but we can look forward to more guest activity here and there, and I will be making an announcement soon about that. And no, sadly, it's not Mel Robbins or Rachel Hollis yet, but someday I hope to have them join us, just putting that out there, as well as new topics all the time, from health, self-care, fun things to try, even reviewing books and movies, and so much more. And if there's something you would love to hear on the podcast, DM me and we'll see what we can do. I'm ever so grateful for this platform, and I'm even more grateful for all of you. You continue to show support by listening every week. And I can't thank you enough for your partnership in this amazing journey. I hope it goes on for a long time because I am certainly not ready to stop. We have only just begun. So, with that, I want to share some best practices for each Enneagram type. So let's start with type 1, our perfectionists, aka reformer. They cultivate self-compassion by embracing good enough rather than demanding perfection. So what that looks like is when you break down large goals into smaller, manageable steps to celebrate those wins. Rather than waiting for an impossible standard of completion. And what this does is it helps you manage the inner critic, reducing burnout and anxiety. Another option, another best practice is through an actionable tip. So schedule proactive rest or leisure activities, such as hobbies, but with no winning involved, to break down the cycle of constant improvement. Also, this mind shift. Practice this self talk of doing my best is enough. By saying these, what it does is reduce the pressure of your internal high standards. How about Enneagram 2? Our helpers. Good practices would be clean giving by pausing to identify and communicate your own needs before helping others. This involves acknowledging your own desires and setting boundaries, ensuring you're not helping out of desperate need for validation or fear of being unloved. There's also implementing a self check. So before automatically saying yes, pause and ask, what do I need right now that I haven't asked for? It's a great opportunity to practice saying something that is really hard, no. And what that does is it helps set some boundaries to small requests, which in turn helps to reduce the tendency to overextend yourself and then in turn feel burnt out. Of course, there's the direct communication. I know that this part is going to be hard, but try it. It's where you directly ask for support and express your needs to trusted friends and family rather than expecting them to read your mind. I know that is a hard thing. Of course, there's the part that you can do where you're acknowledging your own value. So that happens when you reaffirm that you're worthy of love simply for who you are, not just for what you do for others. And again, we're talking about type 2. So, what happens is this approach helps prevent the resentment and depletion, often caused by putting everyone else's needs first and encouraging a shift from that pride to humility. How about some best practices for our Enneagram Type 3, the achiever? Best practice for them is to cultivate being over doing. So, by scheduling intentional, unearned rest, I know this is counterintuitive. This counteracts the urge to define self worth through achievements by allowing for downtime without requiring anything, as opposed to it encourages you to connect with your authentic self rather than a curated image. What about practicing? And then there's practicing self observation. It's where you regularly pause to notice your drive to be efficient and check if you are doing things simply for applause. Okay, so then there's the best practice of embracing vulnerability. It looks like you practicing to share personal feelings and imperfections rather than only presenting a polished, successful image. You can also do this by defining personal values where you identify what truly matters to you rather than striving for goals based on what you think society or others expect. There's also allowing yourself to rest without needing to earn it through productivity. Threes, you can do this. I believe in you. Here's some best practices for Enneagram Type 4, which is to adopt a daily gratitude practice to counter this fixation on lack of fill in the blank and finding this grounding opportunity to take those intense emotions and bring them into the present moment by intentionally recording or acknowledging positive aspects of life, especially in those ordinary moments. So, fours can shift focus from what is missing to what is present, breaking this envy and longing cycle. By implementing a gratitude journal, you're recording these daily moments that feel good and purposeful to you, specifically to counter that urge to focus solely on deep melancholy emotions. Best practice would also be to emphasize the ordinary, where you're finding beauty in routine activities. I don't know so much about washing dishes, but definitely walking outside rather than waiting for these profound or dramatic experiences that might make you feel fulfilled. So, again, that's about finding the beauty in what's considered ordinary. And then objective self observation. So, what it looks like is when feeling deeply emotional, practice observing the emotion without being consumed by it, affirming that you are more than your current feeling and that there's this balance of specialness that you recognize that you can be unique without needing to be fundamentally different or broken. So, this practice, often referred to as finding joy in the ordinary, and it helps fours to cultivate stability and emotional balance. So, how about type 5? Best practices for you is to schedule regular, mandatory physical activity to move out of your head and into your body. You see, fives often withdraw into this mental isolation, and it can lead to burnout. So, having that daily movement, whatever that looks like, yoga, walking, hiking, what it does is it breaks this cycle, reducing anxiety and reconnecting you with the present moment. How about an actionable implementation? So, what that looks like is that you're scheduling it. Treat physical activity like a non negotiable meeting with yourself and actually put it on your calendar. What about hands on hobbies? You can engage in activities that require physical presence, such as gardening, cooking, or even crafting. When you pair that with mindfulness, physical sensation rather than intellectual analysis. So, as you're exercising, I'm feeling calmer, I'm feeling relaxed. And so it brings that sensation of what's happening rather than analyzing that aspect. Type 5's transition from being observers of life to active participants, ensuring that they recharge their limited energy reserves without isolating. Okay, so best practices for Enneagram Type 6 would be to cultivate self trust by pausing to challenge fear based worst case scenario thinking. So when anxiety arises, ask, is this a real problem or is it just my fear talking? Then ground yourself in this present moment through breath work or physical activity. It's kind of this theme about how physical activity can bring you right back into the moment. And I think that works for all Enneagram types, all people. So here's some actionable steps. When anxiety spikes, stop, breathe, and list 3 things that are physically real that are currently happening. What that does is it combats this future focused panic. And then the practice of making small decisions where you build in this confidence without seeking external validation. And you're consciously visualizing positive outcomes and acknowledge your strengths. And don't forget the self care routine where you develop a constant grounding routine, exercise, journaling, or spending time in nature to manage energy. And this practice shifts type 6 from looking for security outside of themselves to realizing they can handle uncertainty internally. And again, so how about some best practices for our Enneagram type 7, our enthusiasts, which is to practice sobering up by sitting with discomfort or staying present with difficult emotions and routine tasks rather than immediately escaping into distraction or new exciting plans. What happens is it builds up this inner depth, leads to this greater satisfaction, and in turn brings emotional balance. And if you utilize some of these actionable steps, like the 5-minute rule, so when painful feelings or boredom arises, resist the impulse to reframe, pivot, or seek instant stimulation. In other words, try sitting with the feelings for 5 minutes to realize that it will not destroy you. Another best practice, finish one thing. So instead of jumping to a new idea, commit to following one project or relationship into deep, sometimes tedious territory. I know it's hard, but nothing to lose by trying one of these things. You might realize that it is helping you to not jump from excitement to excitement to excitement. Okay, there's also this practice of mindfulness where you use grounding techniques like focusing on your breath to bring your energy down into your body's center when your mind starts speeding. And this practice shifts type 7 from constantly escaping into future possibilities to finding fulfillment in the present moment. Now, how about some best practices for Enneagram Type 8, also known as the Challenger, which is to actively practice being vulnerable by sharing softer emotions and lowering defenses with trusted individuals. So, by consciously slowing down, pausing before acting on impulses, and allowing yourself to show weaknesses. I know that this can be hard for you type 8s, but when you cultivate deeper connections and reduce the need for constant control, it just slows everything down. So here's some actionable steps to help with growth. So before you react, pause. When feeling this high intensity energy or anger, take a deep breath and wait to respond, allowing time for reflection rather than immediate forceful action. Another thing that could help and also equally hard is to admit mistakes and ask for help. So when you actively are asking for help or admit when you are wrong, what it does is it shows a gentler, more trustworthy side rather than rather than maintaining a perpetual strong facade. And of course, when you practice active listening, so instead of dominating conversations, focus on hearing others' truth and others' perspective without needing to argue or control or override them. I think I was just talking with someone the other day about the importance of listening. And so when we're having a conversation with someone, are you listening to respond or are you listening to listen? Such a hard thing to do. But I know that when we do that, we're going to hear things that we didn't necessarily hear before. So I challenge all of us to listen to listen. Okay, eights, here's some more best practices. Gauge in this gentle self-care by participating in calming activities. Again, we've been talking about this with all types. Yoga or being out in nature or with animals or pets, which will balance out the natural high energy and reduce stress. And finally, our Enneagram Type 9, our peacemaker, aka mediator. So a best practice for you is to act on your own behalf by setting one small boundary or stating a preference daily, even if it feels uncomfortable. See, because nines often merge with others, merging their identity and sacrificing their own needs for harmony. So practicing assertion brings your own valued perspective to the forefront. So, why is this effective for type 9s? Well, this is effective because it combats self forgetting. You see, 9s tend to numb out or ignore their desires. So, voicing a preference, for example, choosing a restaurant, stating a preference on a project, it keeps them engaged with their own life. And you can reduce this passive aggression by directly stating what you want. Type 9s avoid this resentment that builds from constantly yielding to others. So flip that around, you can build inner agency by these small consistent acts of self-assertion, building confidence where you recognize that your voice matters just as much as anyone else's. Practice saying no to small requests that you would normally say yes to avoid conflict. You can also have a intentional morning by asking, what do I actually want to do today? Before looking at your phone or checking in with others' needs. You can also speak up instead of saying, I don't care, you choose. Make a deliberate choice. I can't thank you enough for this last year. It truly has been amazing, eye-opening, and beauty at its best. So thank you. And with that, the legal stuff. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute professional advice. This podcast is not a substitute for medical care. The materials, movies, videos, or books referred to in this podcast are recommendations only. The views expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the podcast host. That's me, or sponsors. Join me each week as we dive into all things Enneagram, self-care ideas, self-love patterns and rhythms, share ideas from other reputable authors, doctors, and my favorite podcasters. A big thank you to you for being here with me today on Core Motivations Podcast. We're counting on you to spread the word. So hit the follow button, share this episode with someone, and please leave a review. I have to say, I am really loving that you're giving out the 5 stars. It really helps us reach so many more people. You can find me, Michelle, on Instagram at coremotivations_coach or through email, michelle@coremotivationscoach.com. So let me leave you with this. Until next time, and as always, I'm rooting for you.